Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are strapping in for a high-fat, low-carb journey into one of the most popular yet controversial dietary movements of the last decade.
You mean the ketogenic diet?
Exactly, the ketogenic diet and all its low-carb relatives. It's a diet that's really moved from, these fringe health communities right into the mainstream.
Oh, absolutely. It's a necessary deep dive because this isn't some niche thing anymore.
Not at all.
I mean, when you look at the stats, something like 1 in 5 Americans reports being on some kind of low-carb or keto diet.
1 in 5, that's millions of people.
Millions, all making these major, pretty profound metabolic changes. And the science is, well, it's constantly trying to catch up with what we're seeing in clinics, both the good and, frankly, the unexpected side effects.
Which is why we have to look at the whole picture.
We do.
Okay, so before we get into the surprising benefits and the really emerging concerns, let's just make sure we're all speaking the same language. Because low carb, that can mean a lot of things.
It's a huge range.
So when we talk about a strict ketogenic diet, a strict KD, what are we actually trying to do physiologically? What are the macros?
Okay, so the mission of a strict KD is to get your body into a state called nutritional ketosis.
Right, producing ketones.
Exactly. That's where you have an elevated level of ketones in your blood, usually somewhere between 0.5 and 3.0 millimoles per liter. And to get there, you have to restrict carbs. A lot.
How much is a lot?
Usually it's less than 50 grams a day. Sometimes that's only 5 to 10% of your total calories for the day.
Wow.
And your body has to compensate, right? So it switches its main fuel source to fat, which then has to make up, say, 60 to 80% of your calories. And then protein is adequate, but, not excessive.
So the whole premise is you take away the body's preferred fuel, carbohydrates, your glycogen stores run out, and your body is forced to start burning fat for energy.
And that process produces those ketone chemicals, beta-hydroxybutyrate, acetoacetate.
Which become an alternative fuel for your brain and your muscles.
Precisely. Now, it's really important to note that a lot of people follow a diet that's low carb, but maybe not strictly ketogenic.
Right.
And for the big cardiovascular study we're going to talk about, the one that's raising all the alarm bells, they used a slightly broader definition. They called it a low-carb, high-fat diet, or LCHF, a keto-like diet.
Okay, and how did the researchers define that specifically?
Their definition was consuming no more than 25% of your daily energy from carbs, and then more than 45% from fat.
So that 25% carb limit, it's a lot more flexible than the strict 5% of a true KD, but still very restricted compared to what most people eat.
Exactly. It's still a major shift.
So our mission today is clear. We've got this really complicated stack of research. On one hand, profound metabolic benefits, especially for type 2 diabetes. And right next to that, some very, very stark warnings about cardiovascular risk. It's a duality we have to somehow reconcile.
And our job is to unpack that for you. We're going to focus on that strong evidence for managing and even reversing type 2 diabetes. And contrast that with these emerging concerns about cholesterol, especially in this really unique subgroup, the lean mass hyperresponders, or LMHRs.
This is where it gets fascinating.
It really is. We need to go deep into why this diet seems to work so well for one group and why it might actually be dangerous for another.
Let's start with the undisputed success story then. Metabolic health and type 2 diabetes.
Let's scare it.
The effectiveness of carb restriction. I mean, whether we're talking low-carb ketogenic or very low-carb ketogenic, it's generally recognized as really powerful, right? Especially when your goal is managing blood sugar.
Absolutely. For anyone managing T2D, these diets are they're remarkably effective for lowering blood glucose. And because of that, for improving HbA1c.
Which is that long-term marker, right? Your average blood sugar over a few months.
Yes, exactly. By just removing the main source of glucose from your diet, you immediately start to stabilize that underlying problem of insulin resistance. You're taking the flood of sugar out of the equation.
I mean, it's logical. If the problem in T2D is that your cells are resistant to insulin because they're just overwhelmed, taking away the need for so much insulin makes perfect sense.
It does. Your body shifts to this alternate metabolic pathway. Insulin resistance stabilizes. And for a lot of people, blood glucose just normalizes. We have multiple systematic reviews, randomized controlled trials, all showing that carb restriction really improves glycemic control.
And it often exceeds what you see with the traditional low-fat diets that have been recommended for decades.
It does. And beyond those clinical markers that your doctor tracks, there's just a huge amount of anecdotal reporting. the subjective benefits that actually keep people on the diet.
That's the key, isn't it? Adherence.
It is. I mean, when researchers look at people's experiences, they report things that just radically improve their quality of life. Better, more stable energy, less chronic pain, better sleep, and crucially, a huge reduction in cravings and hunger.
Okay, let's stop right there. That finding losing weight without being hungry all the time, that's a complete game changer for anyone who's struggled with just cutting calories. Why does this diet seem to suppress appetite so well?
There are a couple of ideas about what's going on. The simplest one is just that fat and protein are more satiating than processed carbs. They just keep you fuller for longer.
Makes sense.
But the second mechanism is much more interesting, and it's directly related to being in ketosis. It's the ketone bodies themselves.
So the ketones are actually doing something to hunger.
It's believed so. The ketones themselves are thought to be involved in modulating the key hormones that control your appetite. We're talking about ghrelin, the hunger hormone, and leptin, which signals that you're full.
So it's a direct chemical suppression of appetite.
That's the hypothesis.
Yeah.
And it's a key reason for the reduced calorie intake and the weight loss that follows. So many people will tell you they lost weight without feeling hungry, and that really helped them stop obsessing over food.
This all sounds like a huge win, especially for T2D patients. Can we talk about the word reversal? I see that a lot, and it sounds like the ultimate goal.
T2D reversal is a profound and an achievable goal here, but we have to be careful with the words.
It's not a permanent cure.
Right. It doesn't mean the disease is gone forever if you go back to eating lots of carbs. It means the disease is in remission. The clinical definition is usually having an HbA1c below 6.5% without needing any diabetes medication, though sometimes with the exception of metformin.
And what kind of success rates are we seeing for that?
The clinical studies show really significant success. I mean, in one big intervention from Virta Health, they tracked patients for 2 years. And it wasn't just better glycemic control, the reduction in medication was. It was stunning.
How stunning.
Insulin therapy was reduced or completely stopped in 94% of people in the ketogenic group, and sulfonylureas, which are another high-risk class of drugs, were stopped in 100% of the users who were on them. It changes the whole metabolic landscape.
That is huge. It completely changes a patient's relationship with their disease. But let's pivot back to just weight loss. Is keto definitively better for losing weight over the long run?
And this is where we have to introduce a really important nuance. While these diets are definitely effective for weight loss, the data shows there's a bit of an initial illusion.
An illusion? What do you mean?
Well, the very rapid weight loss you see in the first week or two, that's mostly from the loss of fat-free mass.
So not fat.
Not fat. It's mostly water, and especially glycogen stores. Glycogen is just carbohydrates stored with water in your liver and muscles. So when you cut carbs, your body flushes out those glycogen reserves and all the water that's bound to them.
So that first big drop on the scale is mostly a whoosh of water weight, not actual fat. It's kind of a metabolic mirage.
Precisely. That quick drop of 5 or 10 pounds is incredibly motivating, for sure, but it's often just water and glycogen. In fact, some data suggest that actual fat loss slows down a little bit at first, while the body is figuring out its new fuel system. Yes. There was one really compelling metabolic ward study where researchers saw that for the first 2 weeks on keto, weight loss sped up dramatically, but the actual fat loss slowed down. It took the keto group 4 weeks to lose the same amount of fat that a mixed diet group lost in just 2.
So the initial drop was just water?
Mostly, yes. It proves the feeling of success is real, but what's actually happening isn't what people assume.
That's a great takeaway. The first 2 weeks are great for the scale, but don't mistake water for fat. So what about the long term, 2 years or more? Does keto still have a big advantage over, say, a low-fat diet?
Well, when you look at the long-term picture, that statistical advantage often just fades away. Meta-analyses show mixed results. Some find that keto diets lead to a little more weight loss, but others find no statistically significant difference in the long run. The consensus is really that adherence is what predicts success. And the big benefits for T2D are often from the weight loss itself, combined with just taking out the glucose, not necessarily because the diet is called keto.
Okay, one last point before we get to the controversy. For the average person who is overweight or diabetic, the initial changes to their cholesterol profile are often good, right? This sets up a big contrast for what comes next.
Yes, that's a great point. For that group, when they start keto, we often see their numbers move in a great direction. Total cholesterol comes down. Triglycerides, they often drop precipitously, sometimes by 50% or more.
And the good cholesterol.
And we typically see a robust increase in HDL-C, the good cholesterol. This really favorable shift is why so many clinicians were, initially very enthusiastic about this whole approach.
Okay, let's unpack this. We've just gone over the huge metabolic benefits, especially for T2D, and those initial good signs on triglycerides. But now we have to talk about the huge shadow hanging over all this.
Cardiovascular risk.
Yes, the concern over cardiovascular risk, which is mostly driven by high cholesterol. We've heard the great news for diabetics. Now we have to talk about the elephant in the room, this doubling of heart risk. Where did that data come from?
The main concern comes from a really large prospective observational study that was presented at the American College of Cardiology's annual meeting. It used data from the UK Biobank.
Which is a massive database.
Huge. It tracks the health of 500,000 people over many, many years. So it's powerful data, a big group, and a long follow-up time.
And let's just remind everyone how they defined the diet that caused the concern. It wasn't strict keto.
No, it was that self-reported LCHF or keto-like pattern, so no more than 25% of calories from carbs and more than 45% from fat. And they tracked those people for an average of almost 12 years.
Okay, so what were the findings? A doubling of risk is. I mean, that's a very scary number.
It is, and the findings were stark. Regular consumption of this diet was associated with a twofold heightened risk of having a major cardiovascular event.
And that's everything from a heart attack, a stroke.
Yes, heart attacks, strokes, needing a stent to open a blocked artery, peripheral arterial disease, all of it.
And what was the absolute risk? How did the numbers break down?
Over that nearly 12-year follow-up, 9.8% of the people on the LCHF diet had a new cardiac event.
Okay.
And that's compared to just 4.3% of those on a standard, more balanced diet. So the difference is significant.
And what were the biological markers that went along with this higher risk? What was happening in their blood?
The increased risk was strongly linked to two specific things. Much higher levels of LDL cholesterol, the so-called bad cholesterol, and specifically higher levels of apolipoprotein B, or ApoB.
Okay, so why is ApoB so important here, and not just the standard LDL-C number?
That's a great question. Think of ApoB as the structural protein that sits on the outside of every single particle that can cause plaque. So that's LDL, VLDL, IDL, all of them.
So it's like a tag on every dangerous particle.
Exactly. LDL-C measures the mass of cholesterol inside those particles. But ApoB measures the sheer number of potentially problematic particles you have floating around. And many previous studies suggest that a high ApoB is actually a better predictor of heart disease risk than LDL-C alone. The more of these particles you have, the more chances they have to get into the artery wall and start forming plaque.
So seeing both high LDL-C and high ApoB, plus the doubled clinical risk, that raises some really serious questions.
It does. It raises serious concerns about the long-term safety of this diet, at least in a general population context.
This gets to the heart of the debate. The standard thinking is that the high saturated fat in many keto diets is what pushes up LDL-C. But you said the response varies a lot from person to person.
And the variability is why this is so complex. It's why you have to monitor it. I mean, the average LDL in a study might only go up a little bit, but we have data from short-term studies showing these terrifying individual outliers.
What do you mean by outliers?
Well, we've seen case reports where people's LDL-C literally doubled or tripled just a few weeks after starting a ketogenic diet. We saw one person go from a healthy 123 to a very high 225. Another one went from 184 to an extreme 283. And then developed chest pain and was diagnosed with coronary heart disease. These aren't just, statistical quirks. These are acute, life-altering responses.
Okay, but if I'm on social media, all I hear from keto influencers is that the large, fluffy LDL you get on a low-carb diet is totally fine, that only the small, dense particles from high-carb diets are dangerous. Are these big studies looking at particle size?
That is such a critical point, and it's a very common misconception. The idea that large, fluffy LDL particles are benign is, well, it's largely unsupported by the best scientific evidence.
Really?
Yes. While it is true that small, dense LDL is highly atherogenic, it slips into the artery wall easily, the idea that high levels of large LDL are automatically safe is just misleading. Data from the Women's Health Study looked at particle size, and they found that LDL is potentially plaque-forming regardless of its size.
So the size doesn't matter nearly as much as the quantity.
Exactly. In that study, small LDL particles were associated with a 63% increased risk of heart disease. But large LDL particles were also strongly associated with a 44% increased risk. The sheer number of particles, which is what ApoB tracks, that remains the dominant risk factor.
So the argument, my cholesterol is high, but it's the good kind of bad cholesterol, doesn't really hold up.
Not according to the current cardiology consensus, no.
I also hear the counter-argument that, okay, even if LDL goes up on keto, your HDL, the good cholesterol, also goes up, and your triglycerides plummet. Doesn't that somehow cancel out the risks?
That's a tempting idea, but unfortunately it also lacks modern clinical support. For decades, we tried to find drugs to raise HDL, thinking it would be protective.
Right.
But the big trials, the Mendelian randomization studies that look at genetics, they've all failed to show that raising HDL actually reduces heart attacks or mortality.
So high HDL is a good marker of health, but not an intervention for health.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's a great sign that you're metabolically healthy, but actively raising it doesn't seem to offer protection. The consensus is firm. High LDL-C is what drives plaque, and it's the critical target no matter how high your protective HDL gets.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. We've established that twofold cardiac risk was based on a general population that was often overweight, metabolically unhealthy.
The same group that often sees those good initial cholesterol changes.
Right, but there is this unique subgroup, the lean mass hyperresponder, whose response seems to it defies all the traditional rules about high LDL-C.
This is the metabolic curveball, the LMHR phenotype. It emerges in this very specific subset of people on carbohydrate-restricted diets or CRDs. It's a unique profile, this stunning triad of lipid markers.
Okay, lay out that triad for us. What officially defines an LMHR?
You need all three things to fit the profile. First, very high LDL-C. This is the headline number. So often soaring above 200 mg/dL, sometimes much higher. A number that would make any conventional doctor extremely nervous.
Okay, what's the second part?
Second, high HDL-C. And we're talking above 80 mg/dL. These are levels you see in like elite athletes.
And the third?
And third, low triglycerides, very low, below 70 mg/dL. This just shows excellent fat utilization and almost no sugar metabolism.
So extremely high bad cholesterol, extremely high good cholesterol, and very low fat in the blood. And what about their body type? This seems to be the key external feature.
It absolutely is. This response is inversely related to BMI. The LMHRs are significantly leaner than the average person on a low-carb diet. Their mean BMI is around 22.
So being lean is part of the phenotype.
It seems to be. Overweight or obese people are far less likely to have this extreme hyperresponse. It suggests that leanness, low body fat, is a major, maybe even a necessary part of it.
Let's make this real. Let's talk about the famous case study of LM, the 26-year-old man who helped define this group.
LM is the essential example. He started a ketogenic diet for medical reasons to manage his severe ulcerative colitis. And it worked. He achieved remission, got off his meds.
And before the diet, his cholesterol was normal.
Very normal. His LDL-C was a low-risk 95 mg/dL.
And what happened after he went keto?
His lipids just. They soared to levels you usually only see in people with severe genetic disorders. His LDL-C peaked at an astonishing 545 mg/dL.
545.
545. Paired with high HDL, over 100, and crazy low triglycerides around 40. He was a textbook LMHR.
Now, this kind of response is usually blamed on eating too much saturated fat. Red meat, butter, cheese.
Yeah.
Did his diet fit that?
And this is the crucial detail that really challenges that whole hypothesis. LM actively prioritized unsaturated fats.
So olive oil, fatty fish.
Exactly. Fatty seafood, extra virgin olive oil. And he deliberately restricted saturated fat from red meat and dairy. He even tried cutting out egg yolks and liver to reduce his dietary cholesterol intake. And despite all that, his LDL stayed sky high.
So it wasn't the saturated fat he was eating.
The conclusion from his case is that for him, this response was tied to his leanness and his metabolism, not simply the amount of saturated fat he ate.
And to prove that point, when he deliberately gained a little weight, his LDL actually went down, right?
It did. He gained a modest 6 to 10 pounds, and his LDL-C dropped by over 100 points.
That's insane. Gaining weight, which we think of as bad, lowered his biggest risk factor.
It just highlights how different this metabolism is. The fact that getting less lean could lower his LDL is consistent with what we see in bigger groups on these diets.
But the real kicker, the thing that just completely breaks the traditional risk model, was the scan he had after years of living with this extreme cholesterol.
Yes. After 2.5 years of these extremely high LDL levels, he had a coronary computed tomography angiography scan, CCTA. It's a very detailed scan that looks for both hard and soft plaque in the arteries.
And given his exposure LDL over 500 for years, that's like having untreated familial hypercholesterolemia. You would have to expect he'd have some plaque.
Absolutely. The traditional models would predict he should have measurable plaque. But the scan showed no evidence of calcified or non-calcified plaque whatsoever. His result was a perfect CAD-RADS of 0.
A CAD-RADS of 0, clean arteries.
Clean artery.
After 2 years of LDL over 500, that doesn't just challenge the model, that shatters it. How do we even begin to explain extremely high LDL with a total absence of plaque?
And this is where we need the Lipid Energy Model, or LAM. It's a hypothesis that suggests this high LDL in an LMHR isn't a sign of disease. It's a functional part of an incredibly efficient fat-burning metabolism.
Okay, break that down for us. Let's use an analogy.
Okay, imagine your body's energy system is a massive shipping operation. When you're on a carb-restricted diet, your muscles and organs are desperate for fat-based fuel.
They're putting in orders.
Big orders. So the liver, the central warehouse, starts shipping out massive transport trucks called VLDL, or very low-density lipoproteins. And these trucks are packed with triglycerides, the fat fuel.
Okay.
These VLDL trucks enter the bloodstream. They get met by this enzyme, lipoprotein lipase, or LPL, which is like a super fast road crew that unloads the triglyceride fuel for the tissues.
So the VLDL trucks are getting emptied really quickly.
Exactly. And when a VLDL truck gets emptied, it gets remodeled. Part of it becomes HDL, the good cholesterol, like the efficient return vehicles. And the core remnant, the empty VLDL shell, gets recycled into what we measure as LDL-C.
Ah, I see.
The model suggests that in these lean, efficient LMHRs, their LPL crews are running at max capacity. They're demanding a huge volume of VLDL trucks. And the high LDL-C we see is simply a byproduct of this high-volume shipping process. It's the constant flow of empty shells being turned into LDL.
So it's not a sign of a traffic jam. It's a sign of a very busy, very efficient highway.
That's the idea. It reframes the whole issue. It suggests that in this specific metabolically optimized context, high LDL might be a marker of metabolic efficiency, not dysfunction.
And the reason it might not be causing plaque is because there isn't the underlying inflammation or insulin resistance that you'd see in the general population?
That's the theory, that the primary driver of plaque isn't just the LDL particle count, it's the underlying metabolic health.
This sounds like a really rare response. How rare are LMHRs in the general population?
Extraordinarily rare. An analysis of over 70,000 people in the NAHE database, which is a cross-section of mostly overweight Americans on standard diets, found only 3 cases that fit the LMHR criteria.
3 out of 70,000, so basically non-existent.
Practically. But, and this is key, when you look specifically at people intentionally on low-carb diets, that number changes dramatically.
Right.
In those groups, LMHRs were actually relatively common, making up about 18% of the cohort.
So the diet causes this phenotype in a certain subset of lean people?
It seems to. And this means we absolutely cannot apply the standard risk calculators to this group without more research. We have to wait for the long-term data.
And that research is happening now.
It is. There's a prospective study underway right now tracking atherosclerotic plaque in 100 LMHRs. We need that to see if a CAD-RADS of 0 at 2.5 years still means clean arteries after 10 or 20 years. The science is literally being written as we speak.
Okay, let's shift away from the cholesterol mystery for a bit and talk about some of the broader, more practical public health risks. I mean, following a KD means you're radically changing your food choices, which has to raise concerns about overall diet quality.
That is a major concern, and it often gets overlooked when people are just focused on macros.
Right.
Extreme carb restriction, by definition, limits your intake of a lot of nutrient-dense foods. You're cutting out fruits, many vegetables, legumes, whole grains, and that absolutely increases the risk of nutritional deficiencies over time.
So what are the big vitamins and minerals people on keto might be missing?
The research consistently shows potential shortfalls in thiamine, folate, vitamins A, E, B6, calcium, magnesium, iron, and potassium. Low potassium is a big one. It contributes to that keto flu people talk about.
So supplementation is almost required?
It's often necessary, but supplements rarely replicate the benefits you get from whole foods.
And what about the digestive system? What's the impact on our gut microbiome?
This is one of the most serious long-term concerns. Fiber intake on these diets is typically extremely low.
Because you're cutting out all the main fiber sources.
Exactly. Beans, lentils, whole grains, many fruits. They're all out. And low fiber leads directly to things like constipation.
But it just goes deeper than that.
It goes much deeper. It has profound implications for your gut ecosystem. You're essentially starving the beneficial fiber-eating bacteria in your gut. These are the bacteria that produce things like butyrate, which is vital for gut health, and lowering systemic inflammation.
And if those good bacteria don't get fed their preferred food,
They start to eat something else.
which is
They can start to eat the mucous membrane that protects the lining of your gut. Essentially, they eat away at that protective barrier, which can increase gut permeability, what some people call leaky gut, and that can lead to inflammation and other issues down the road.
Let's talk about the liver. What do we see in animal models when it comes to high-fat diets and fatty liver disease?
Well, research in mice has shown some severe metabolic complications. Specifically, a very high-fat, low-carb diet caused a rapid onset of fatty liver disease, and it harmed their blood sugar regulation, with changes happening within just days.
Why does that happen to the liver?
Well, when the diet is 80% fat, the
Yep.
liver is just forced to handle this massive lipid load. It can't keep up, and the fat starts to accumulate in the liver cells. That's a condition called hepatic steatosis.
And did the mouse study show any difference between males and females?
Yes, and this is really interesting. There was a stark sex difference. Male mice developed severe fatty liver, but the female mice, they showed no significant buildup of fat in their liver, and they maintained better blood sugar control.
So hormones might play a protective role.
It suggests that yes, it means a very high-fat diet may pose a disproportionate risk to males compared to females when it comes to liver health.
What about inflammation? I often hear that ketones themselves are anti-inflammatory. Is that what the data shows?
The results are maddeningly mixed. It's so characteristic of nutrition science. On one hand, some systematic reviews of overweight adults do show an anti-inflammatory effect. Some studies show a significant reduction in markers like C-reactive protein, or CRP, and IL-6.
Okay, so that supports the idea, but where's the conflict?
The conflict comes from other studies. Some report CRP either increasing significantly or not changing at all on the diet.
So why the different result? Is it the type of fat they're eating?
That's likely a big part of it. The source of the fat, the overall quality of the diet, it all matters. In one metabolic ward trial, they compared an animal-based KD, high in saturated fat, to a plant-based low-fat diet, and the KD resulted in substantially higher CRP.
So a highly inflammatory diet, even if it's low carb, could still be inflammatory.
Exactly. The anti-inflammatory benefits of ketosis might just get canceled out by the pro-inflammatory effects of the fats you're choosing.
Okay, let's turn to kidney health. Is there a risk of kidney stones?
Nephrolithiasis, or kidney stones, is a documented risk, and it comes back to the diet's composition. A typical KD is heavy on animal protein and fat, and it reduces the intake of protective foods like fruits and vegetables.
And that changes the urine.
It creates a urinary environment that is highly conducive to stone formation. It leads to low urinary citrate, helps prevent stones, and a low pH, meaning acidic urine. High animal protein is a well-known promoter of kidney stones.
Finally, what about reproductive health? This feels like a really important one. What are the risks for women of childbearing age?
This is perhaps one of the most serious non-cardiovascular warnings, especially since so many pregnancies are unplanned.
Okay.
Studies have shown that low-carb diets, so less than 95 grams of carbs a day consumed before conception, were associated with a 30% higher risk of neural tube defects in the infant.
And that was even if the women were taking folate supplements.
Yes, that's the shocking part. The increased risk was there regardless of folic acid supplementation. It seems that restricting the whole foods that are naturally rich in folate and other B vitamins is the issue here.
Wow.
And if the pregnancy was unplanned, the risk was even higher, an 89% increased risk of neural tube defects. The implications are profound. And on top of that, a low-carb diet high in animal products was also associated with a 36% higher risk of gestational diabetes during the pregnancy itself.
That's a huge warning. Okay, let's move to practical application. This is vital for anyone listening who is managing type 2 diabetes and is thinking about trying this. We need to talk about medication management. This is where the risk becomes immediate.
Absolutely. The core message is this. You must have strict medical supervision. This isn't optional.
Because the blood sugar drops so fast?
It drops immediately and profoundly. If you don't adjust your medications proactively, you face a very high and immediate risk of symptomatic hypoglycemia, dangerously low blood sugar or hypotension, low blood pressure.
So what's the strategy? Is it better to be aggressive or conservative with adjustments?
You need to be conservative with your blood sugar goals at first, but aggressive with reducing certain medications. Meaning, it's safer to let your blood sugar run a little bit high for the first few days or weeks. Clinicians will often target daily glucose levels between, say, 145 and 200 milli-GDL.
That gives you a safety buffer.
A crucial safety buffer against severe hypos while your body adapts.
Okay, can you walk us through the order of deprescribing? Which meds are the highest risk and need to be stopped immediately?
Yes, we can break it down into tiers of risk.
Yeah.
And the top tier has a very unique and life-threatening risk.
Cool.
Tier 1, stop immediately. This is the class of drugs called SGLT2 inhibitors like Farxiga or Jardiance. They need to be stopped first because of the severe risk of euglycemic ketoacidosis, or DKA, when you combine them with a low-carb diet.
And what's unique about that DKA risk? Because DKA is usually associated with really high blood sugar.
That's what makes it so insidious. These drugs force your kidneys to flush out glucose in the urine. When you add carb restriction, your body is already making ketones. The combination can lead to a dangerous buildup of acid in your blood, even when your blood sugar looks normal.
That's terrifying.
It is. Patients have to be vigilant for symptoms like nausea, unusual weakness, fatigue. The risks just severely outweigh the benefits on a KD.
Okay, so that's tier 1. What about the drugs that directly impact insulin?
Tier 2, reduce significantly. This is the next group because the risk is immediate hypoglycemia. This is all your insulins, short and long-acting, and drugs like sulfonylureas and meglitinides.
Because they either are insulin or they force your body to make it.
Exactly. And with blood sugar dropping so fast, you have to cut these doses aggressively and proactively. The recommendation for insulin is often a 33 to 50% dose reduction right from the start. You can't wait until you feel symptoms.
What about the newer classes of drugs?
Tier 3, low hypoglycemia risk. This is where your DPP-4 inhibitors and GLP-1 receptor agonists like Ozempic fall. They have a low risk of hypos, so the decision to stop them is often based on patient preference.
So you might even keep some of them.
You might. Many patients like to stay on the GLP-1s for a while because they're great for reducing appetite and helping with weight loss, which supports the diet.
And finally, what about the bedrock medications, the ones that are usually last to go?
Tier 4, maintained longer. This is primarily metformin. It doesn't pose a risk of acute hypoglycemia, and its mechanism, which reduces glucose production by the liver, really supports the goals of the diet. It's often the very last T2D medication to be stopped.
And you mentioned blood pressure meds might also need adjusting, but on a slower timeline.
That's right. The blood pressure changes happen over weeks or months, but since LCHF diets often have a diuretic effect on their own.
Right, from losing all that water and sodium.
Yes. So diuretics should typically be the first blood pressure medication that gets stopped to prevent hypotension, dizziness, lightheadedness.
This has been a deeply complex journey. We've really established this dual nature of LCHF and keto diets. On one side, you have these profound, sometimes life-changing benefits for metabolic disease, T2D reversal, significant weight loss.
And on the other side, that's contrasted with a demonstrated association with increased cardiovascular risk in the wider population, a risk tied fundamentally to those elevations in LDL-C and ApoB particles.
It really reminds us that no single diet is a silver bullet. Context your own metabolic history, your body composition, it matters immensely.
It's everything.
So what does this all mean for someone trying to make an informed choice? What's the final synthesis?
The synthesis is that you have to take a personalized approach. The data is not one size fits all. If you are obese and insulin resistant, the short-term benefits are immense, but you absolutely must monitor your LDL and ApoB, and you must manage your medications with a doctor.
And if you're already lean and metabolically healthy,
Then you have to be hyper aware of the possibility of that extreme LMHR response. Monitoring your full lipid profile is non-negotiable. And that LMHR subgroup is so important for research because their unique profile is actively challenging decades of cardiology dogma that was built on data from a mostly unhealthy population.
the big lesson here is you can't just assume your body's response will match the average from a study.
Absolutely not. When your diet makes your LDL-C double or triple, you are not the average patient anymore. You require specialized ongoing monitoring.
Which leads us right to our final provocative thought for you to explore on your own. Given the astonishing case of the lean mass hyperresponder, LM, who maintained extreme hypercholesterolemia for over 2 years, with LDL levels soaring over 500, yet showed a complete absence of measurable coronary plaque, a CAD-RADS of 0. This raises a really important question for the future of medicine. Are the current universally applied risk models for LDL-C sufficient, or must they be refined to account for the overall metabolic health, leanness, and unique lipoprotein profiles we see in these highly metabolically healthy individuals who are just efficiently using fat for fuel? Does the quality of the LDL particle, rather than just the quantity, become the ultimate determining factor of risk when metabolic health is optimized?
The science is still being written on that, and the answer, whatever it is, will likely reshape how we define risk for specific groups in the future.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.